Before there were gods, before there were temples, before there were priests, before anyone knelt before an altar and whispered a name into the dark, there was something else, something older. And here is what surprises most people. It wasn't chaos. It wasn't fear. It wasn't primitive superstition dressed up in animal skins. It was a relationship. The oldest spiritual instinct in human history wasn't about power. It wasn't about pleasing an authority or earning favor from something above you. It was about belonging to the wind, to the rain, to the fire that kept you alive through the night. And somehow, over thousands of years, we forgot that. Tonight, we're going back. Most people who grow up religious, whether in Islam, Christianity, Judaism, Zoroastrianism, Hinduism, or any tradition, are handed a story that begins with a God. In the beginning, God created. In the beginning, Ahura Mazda spoke light into existence. In the beginning, Brahma dreamed the world. The story always starts there, with a divine being, a divine intention, a divine hand shaping things. But here is the question that almost no one asks in Sunday school or in the mosque or in the fire temple. What came before? Not cosmologically, not what existed before creation. I mean spiritually. What did people believe before they had the concept of a God? What were early humans reaching toward when they first looked up at the sky and felt that pull, that unmistakable sense that something was out there, something worth acknowledging? This question used to be dismissed. Scholars in the 18 and 1900s called early human religion primitive. They assumed it was a kind of broken, confused precursor to the real religions that came later. The idea was that humanity started in spiritual darkness and gradually evolved toward enlightenment, toward monotheism, toward philosophy, toward theology. But that story is falling apart. Because the more archaeologists dig, the more anthropologists study, the more we are finding that early human spirituality wasn't confused or broken at all. It was coherent. It had its own logic, its own beauty, its own depth, and it centered on something that many of us deep down still feel today, the sacred presence of the natural world. Let's go back. Not just hundreds of years, but tens of thousands of years. Let's go back to a moment before writing, before cities, before agriculture. Around 75,000 years ago, in what is now South Africa, a group of people gathered in a cave. We know this cave today as the Blombos Cave. Inside, archaeologists found something extraordinary: pieces of ochre, a red mineral pigment that had been deliberately ground and shaped, and shells that had been pierced to make beads. This tells us something profound. These people were decorating themselves. They were making art. And the red ochre, red, the color of blood, the color of life, appears again and again in early human ritual sites across the world. Why red? Why this color specifically used in burial, in ceremony, across cultures that never touched each other? We don't know for certain. But what researchers believe is that early humans were marking something, acknowledging something. The line between the living and the dead, perhaps. The cycle of life that pulsed through everything. Plants, animals, seasons, human bodies. Then there's Göbekli Tepe. If you've never heard of Göbekli Tepe, let me tell you, it will change the way you think about human history. It changed the way scholars think about human history. Göbekli Tepe is a site in what is now southeastern Turkey. It was built approximately 11,600 years ago. that is older than Stonehenge by 6,000 years, older than the pyramids by 7,000 years. And here is the astonishing part. Göbekli Tepe was built before agriculture, before permanent settlements, before the invention of the wheel, before pottery. The people who built it were hunter-gatherers. They were, by the old definitions, primitive, and yet they quarried and moved limestone pillars weighing up to 20 tons. They carved them with extraordinary detail. Images of foxes, scorpions, vultures, snakes, abstract symbols we still don't fully understand. And they did all of this, scholars believe, for ritual purposes, for some form of worship. But who were they worshipping? Not a named God, not a creator deity. The carvings aren't of heavenly beings sitting on thrones. They are of animals. They are of the natural world. The creatures that surrounded these people fed them, threatened them, awed them. The animals at Göbekli Tepe weren't decorations. They were most likely sacred presences, powers. They were the world's first congregation. There's a word for this worldview. Scholars call it animism. And I want to be careful here because the word animism has been used condescendingly for a long time. The assumption was that animism was a stage humanity passed through, a childhood of the spirit, before we grew up into proper religion. That assumption is wrong. Animism is not a stage. It is a perspective. And it is one that billions of people across history have held with great sophistication, great beauty, and great depth. At its core, animism is the belief that the world is alive, not metaphorically, but really alive, that the river has a presence, that the mountain is aware, that the storm is not just weather, but a kind of a speech, that animals are not objects to be used, but persons to be related to. This doesn't mean animists thought the river was a human sitting in the water. It means they experienced the river as having something like agency, something like spirit, something like will. And if you have ever stood at the edge of a powerful river, felt the roar of it, the cold spray, the sheer force, you understand, even if only for a moment, what they were feeling. There is something there, something that demands respect, something that can give life and take it away. Early humans lived inside that feeling every single day. In the traditions of many indigenous peoples across the Americas, across Africa, across Australia, across Siberia, animism is not a historical relic. It is a living, present, active relationship with the world. The land is not property. The animals are not resources. The seasons are not inconveniences. Everything is kin. The Lakota people of the Great Plains have a phrase, mitakuye oyasin. It is usually translated as all my relations or we are all related. But it doesn't just mean human relatives. It means the wolves and the eagles and the grasses and the stones and the rivers. It means the clouds. This phrase is offered as a prayer, as an acknowledgement. It is one of the most ancient spiritual impulses of our species, spoken still today. Now, I have to bring this closer to home, or at least closer to my home, because there is something deeply personal for me about this story. As a Persian woman, I grew up in a tradition, the Zoroastrian tradition, that is itself one of the oldest organized religions in the world. And Zoroastrianism is fascinating because it sits exactly at the crossroads of what we are talking about tonight. Zoroastrianism is often called the world's first monotheistic religion, or at least one of them. Zarathustra, Zoroaster in Greek, lived somewhere between 1500 and 1000 BCE, maybe earlier. He preached the worship of one supreme being, Ahura Mazda, the Lord of Wisdom. He drew a clear line between truth and lie, light and darkness, creation and destruction. And yet, and this is the part people don't know, Zoroastrianism never fully left the older world. Before Zarathustra, the ancient Iranian peoples worshipped a complex pantheon of nature deities called the Yazata, beings of fire, water, wind, and sun. These weren't just metaphors. Fire was sacred, actually sacred, not a symbol of God's presence. Fire was a divine presence. Water was sacred. The earth was sacred. When Zarathustra came and reorganized the faith around Ahura Mazda, he didn't erase these older reverences. He absorbed them. In Zoroastrianism today, in the Yasna prayers, in the fire temples, fire is still maintained as something holy. Water is still honored with specific rituals. The Amesha Spentas, the divine attributes of Ahura Mazda, are each associated with an element of the natural world. Khordad is the spirit of water. Amordad is the spirit of plants. Shahrivar is the spirit of metal and sky. The ancient relationship between the Persian peoples and the natural world didn't disappear when organized religion arrived. It transformed. It was given new names, new theological frames, but underneath, the instinct was the same. The world is alive. The world is sacred. You are inside it, not above it. And I think about that sometimes, about how my own heritage carries this double current. The high theology of Ahura Mazda and the ancient whisper of the sacred river, both living in the same tradition, in the same prayers, in the same fire that has burned continuously in some Zoroastrian temples for over 1,000 years. That fire was not lit to honor a concept. It was lit to honor presence. So what happened? How did we go from a world where every river had a spirit and every animal was a relative to a world where nature is largely seen as backdrop, as a resource, as scenery? It is a long, complicated story. And it is not a story of progress, exactly. It is a story of trade-offs. As human societies grew, as cities emerged, as agriculture took hold, as populations exploded, the old intimate relationship with the land became harder to sustain. You can feel kinship with a forest when you live inside it. It is much harder when you are managing 10,000 acres of farmland. The gods of ancient civilizations reflect this shift. The Mesopotamian gods, Enlil, Ishtar, Marduk, they are powerful, capricious, and very human in their politics. They argue, they scheme, they demand tribute. The relationship between humans and gods begins to look more like the relationship between subjects and a king. And then, with the Abrahamic traditions, with Judaism, Christianity, Islam, comes a decisive theological step. God is fully transcendent, fully above nature. The world is creation, which means it is separate from the Creator. Nature is no longer divine. It is gift, beautiful, certainly, but not sacred in itself. This move had extraordinary consequences. On one hand, it gave human beings a new kind of dignity and agency. If the world is not full of spirits that must be appeased, you are free to explore it, to understand it, to shape it. The roots of science are tangled up with this theological shift. On the other hand, something was lost. When the world stops being alive, you stop listening to it. When the river is no longer sacred, it can be damned. When the forest is no longer a congregation of relatives, it can be cleared. When the earth is no longer the body of something holy, it becomes a warehouse. I am not saying this as a political statement. I am saying this as a spiritual observation. The ecological crisis of our time may be at its root a spiritual crisis, a crisis of relationship, a loss of the oldest faith, the faith that the world around us matters, not just as a resource but as a presence. Here is something I find deeply moving. All over the world, people who have never studied animism, people who have grown up in modern secular families or conventional religious ones, report the same experience. Standing in an old forest, they feel something. Watching the sun set over the ocean, they feel something. Sitting beside a fire late at night with no one talking, they feel something. It is not easily named, it doesn't fit neatly into any doctrine, but it is unmistakably there. A sense of presence, of connection, of being seen by something larger than yourself. The mystics of every tradition have pointed to this. The Sufi poets wrote about it in language so beautiful it makes you ache. The Christian desert fathers found it in silence. The Jewish concept of the Shekhinah, the divine presence dwelling in the world, carries it. Even within highly organized text-based religions, this thread survives. The feeling that the world is inhabited, that you are not walking through a dead universe but a living one. I think this is not a metaphor. I think it is memory, deep, cellular, ancestral memory from a time when this was not a religious idea but simply experience, when the world told you things and you knew how to listen. And perhaps part of the spiritual restlessness so many people feel today, the sense that something is missing, that the tradition they were raised in doesn't quite contain the whole of what they're reaching for. Perhaps that restlessness is not a failure of faith. Perhaps it is the oldest faith waking up. Before the gods, there was the wind. Before the temples, there was the fire. Before the scriptures, there was the sky at dawn, that impossible, wordless moment when light returns and everything breathing exhales at once. The earliest humans who felt that moment didn't call it prayer. They didn't call it anything. They just felt it, the recognition that they were part of something immense, something alive, something worth being grateful for. And then, over thousands of years, we built languages for it. We built stories. We built theologies and philosophies and traditions, each one trying in its own way to carry that original recognition forward. Some traditions carried it better than others, some almost lost it, some are fighting to remember it right now. But here is what I believe and what the evidence suggests, that recognition never fully left us. It is layered underneath every prayer, every hymn, every candle lit in a dark room, every moment of silent awe at the edge of something larger than ourselves. We are, all of us, still standing at the edge of that original fire, still reaching towards something we have never fully been able to name. And maybe that is the most sacred thing of all. Not the answer, but the reaching. Thank you for watching First Beliefs. If something in this episode moved you, sit with it. And if you want to keep exploring, the next episode goes even deeper into the oldest known religious text ever written and what it tells us about what early humans actually feared. I'll see you there.